What if I tell you that the roots of Indian democracy was shaken by an event that took place on this date in the year 1975? Well, I am referring to the judgment pronounced by Allahabad High Court Judge Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha on 12th June 1975 in the case Rajnarain versus Indira Gandhi. His judgment invalidated the election, the 1971 election of the then Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, from Rai Bareli. What was the basis for the judgment? Corrupt electoral practices. This judgment shook the political circle of India, it shook the masses in India, because for the first time, a sitting Prime Minister's election was declared invalid by a court. Now, from a legal point of view, it is important, but more than the legal point of view, it is crucial, critical for the political earthquake that it invoked. 2 weeks after the judgment was pronounced, in the night on 25th June 1975, the then President of India, Fakhruddin Ahmed Ali, declared a national emergency on the grounds of internal disturbance on the advice of the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. This declaration was a shock to everybody. In fact, Indira Gandhi's own cabinet colleagues were not aware of this declaration. Nobody expected that national emergency would be declared as a reaction to the judgment. Now, the national emergency was in force for 21 months. It finally was revoked on 21st March 1977. What happened in these 21 months is very important because it brought in significant changes in the constitution. It brought into the forefront the gross misuse of power of the state machinery. Now let's first understand what happened during this period. Firstly, MISA, the Internal Security Act, was invoked. It was used to arrest people. Nearly 1 lakh people were arrested across the length and breadth of the country in these 21 months, including prominent opposition leaders like Jayaprakash Narayan, Atal Bihari Vajpayee. In fact, already in India, the JP movement was at its peak and emergency was declared. Not just arrest of people, the press was also severely restricted. An example of the protest of the press includes a blank editorial published by the Indian Express paper in a protest of the severe restrictions that were imposed on the press. The bureaucracy was used by the state to misuse power. In fact, the bureaucracy worked on verbal orders. A classic example of misuse of bureaucracy is the fake encounters that increased during emergency in Naxal affected areas. Not just this, emergency automatically means centralized control. So center's control over the states has increased. There were gross violations of human rights. Forced sterilization camps were conducted. So in totality, this 21 months of emergency imposed in a 28-year-old free country, India, had a severe impact. It was a severe blow on all counts. Now, this blow also affected the constitution. How? There were 2 major amendments that were made to the constitution. The first was the 39th constitutional amendment, which banned the courts from judicially reviewing the election of the Prime Minister. So it protected the Prime Minister's office from judicial review, the election of the Prime Minister to the office from judicial review. If this was the first change, the second change is even more important. The 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act was enacted on the recommendations of Sardar Swaran Singh Committee. 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act is often referred to as a mini constitution. Why? Because it made changes, it amended almost all the key provisions, the core of the constitution, beginning from preamble. As we all know, it was the only amendment to the preamble. It added the words socialist, secular and integrity to the preamble. Now, it did not stop there. It created a lot of imbalance in the constitution. It increased the power of the executive. It reduced the power of the judiciary. So this actually imbalanced. Indian constitution stood for balance of powers. The constitution was framed so beautifully that none of the three organs of government were more powerful than the other two organs. But this amendment imbalanced powers. It imposed restrictions on fundamental rights. It led to suspension of fundamental rights. So it basically may change the constitution so much and to such an extent that it was nicknamed mini constitution. Now moving forward, after the emergency was revoked, there were elections held in 1977. In these elections, Congress for the first time lost, and we saw Janata Party forming the government. The elections and the victory of Janata Party is very significant because for the first time the Indian National Congress lost power. So it ended single party rule in India. There was an alternative government formed in India. Now what happened after this government came? What was the government's reaction to emergency, whatever happened during emergency? The government did two things. One, it appointed the Shah Commission to inquire into the misuse of state apparatus, machinery and power during emergency. The second one is very important because it is from the constitutional standpoint. The second major step taken by the Janata government was the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. The enactment of this was basically to correct the imbalances that were created in the constitution by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. So it was a reaction to the 42nd Amendment. What did the 44th Amendment do? I will explain from the point of view of emergency. Let me tell you from that point of view. The first change it made is, as I said earlier, majority of the colleagues in her cabinet were not informed about the imposition of emergency when it was imposed. Now to correct this, the 44th Constitutional Amendment mandated a written recommendation by the cabinet for the president to proclaim emergency. Today, the president cannot proclaim a national emergency unless there is a written recommendation by the cabinet, not the prime minister. That was the first major change. The second change related to emergency of 1975 made by the 44th Amendment was the grounds on which the emergency was declared. The emergency was declared in 1975 on the grounds of internal disturbance, which was mentioned in the Constitution. But internal disturbance is a very vague term. Anything can be considered as an internal disturbance. In order to prevent the misuse of this term, the 44th Amendment replaced the term internal disturbance with armed rebellion. Armed rebellion is more narrow, it is more focused. That is the reason it was replaced. Likewise, the majority required for the parliament to approve of the proclamation of national emergency was changed from simple to special majority. So like this, a number of changes were brought in the constitution to correct, one, the imbalances created by the 42nd Amendment, two, to prevent the misuse of emergency provisions given in the constitution. Now these 21 months of national emergency, even today, we consider the 1975 national emergency as a dark chapter in India, in Indian democracy. Having said this, I will also say that these 21 months have actually invoked a lot of political consciousness in India. They created an awareness in citizens on their rights, the fight for their rights. They gave an alternative to the political power in this country. So, to conclude, undoubtedly the national emergency of 1975 was the darkest chapter in Indian democracy because it was filled with state misuse of power. However, it also led to a political consciousness in India. What do you think about it? Comment. Thank you.